Hi, I'm Anke Corbin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Globig. Our mission is to help you expand into local and international markets faster, more affordably, more effectively, and compliantly. And one of the things that we want to do is share with you how you might reduce the risk when you're expanding your business to validate if your product will succeed in a new market. And one of those things that we're going to introduce you to are called International Empathy Interviews. I want to acknowledge Zach Neese and his design thinking workshops and the work that he's done at Techstars as well as Rally Software. And thank him for letting us utilize this and modify it for an international audience. There's also elements of the Stanford design thinking in this, as well as Running Lean, the book by Ash Moira. So keep in mind that those are really fantastic resources. There's a lot more at the end that we'll share so that you can learn more. But these are some inspirations and frameworks for how we did this, but with the bend towards thinking about how culture and international approaches are integrated into some of these things. So there's some modifications for you. This video has also been modified for an on-demand audience, so all of the live components and all the Q&A and all the polls have been edited. If you'd like to have questions answered specifically to your business, please join the live webinars versus the on-demand ones where we really can jump in and learn a lot more about your specific challenges and answer those questions. So why validate information in advance? One of the biggest risks of going into a market is that there's just so many unknowns, and it's expensive and it's time consuming, and it may or may not work the way you think it does. And as a matter of fact, it's most likely not going to work the way you think it does. So the more that you can understand your customers in those new markets, the more that you can understand that market, you can reduce risk. So we want to make sure that you can get actionable data so that you can save money and save time. We recommend, even if you're a larger company, even if you've had significant success in your home market, that you consider yourself a startup and a company that really hasn't learned all of these things. And don't assume that your cloud or your product or the existing marketing that you have are going to work in a new market. They may not. And most likely you're going to learn a lot by doing these exercises that can reduce that risk and get you there much faster. You won't have product market fit immediately, and you may not have solution fit either. So what are some of the things that you're validating? So some of the core drivers of success for companies that we've worked with have included where they needed really highly skilled labor. And so a question, if you are one of those companies and you're a very, very technical company that's really going abroad to build out a technology office, is can you hire enough of that skilled labor as an unknown company? Can you get them at the price that you need to really be competitive? Can you get them fast enough so that you can ramp up the way that you need for your business? And then can you keep that labor, that talent? Or do you have to recognize that you're in a hot labor market and you're always going to have your employees poached? Something to remember is unknown companies, they struggle sometimes in getting the talent that they need, because not every country is they don't have a high risk tolerance. They really want to make sure that you're there for the long haul, that you are there and you're a great employer, and they're really going to look at you critically initially, and so that might keep you from getting what you need. Another thing to consider is that in a lot of markets, people aren't willing to travel or willing to move. So if you're trying to pull from a really broad market and you're trying to bring people in from neighboring countries perhaps, or even farther away, recognize that a lot of cultures aren't as flexible and aren't willing to do that. Another challenge we've seen is that companies may be relying on friendly regulatory environments for product testing. This is especially the case in health tech and healthcare, and also in pharmaceuticals and other technology areas where you really need the governmental support, and if that government is super stable and if they're willing to give it to you, or what are some of the things and the challenges so that you can actually do the testing you want. It's a reason that a number of companies actually will launch in a foreign market, even if they may be a US company, so that they can get some product testing and some validation work, especially in the biosciences and in the healthcare and in the pharmaceutical areas, because they may have friendlier regulatory environments. And then those learnings can be applied in the United States and other more difficult countries, so that, you know, that gets you there a lot faster. Another thing that's something to validate and consider is if your product is a cultural fit. Are the problems that you solve, are they solved in a different way in a certain market, so that it may not be compatible with your products? Another one is when, by the time, let's say you have a physical product, by the time you sell your product at the price point necessary to attract customers and compete in the market, do you earn the margins that you need, and can you deliver the product in the time frame that customers expect you to? Or do you need to look at developing manufacturing resources closer to the market you're selling in? All of those are just things to consider and test in advance and answer in advance. So, and then another one that's been a big one for companies that we've worked with are, can you actually market to customers the way you do in your home country? We have companies that have been incredibly successful, and they've been relying on email marketing and you know, a lot of testing around social media advertising and things like that, that certain markets that they are really interested in going into, they just can't use those same marketing channels and techniques. And so they've struggled with getting into that market, and they have had to really test a lot of different things to see if they can duplicate the success with other marketing channels. So what are some ways to validate your product? Some of the most affordable and effective ways to really validate core drivers and run experiments, they include one-to-one customer interviews, finding those friendly prospects and even current customers in the market and asking them to spend some time with you. And we'll talk more about each of these and see if we can help you figure out what might be best for you. Another really important one is our empathy interviews, and those are really specifically where you do a lot of interviews utilizing a process that's been created by Zach Neese and Ash Moira and a number of others that are doing design thinking and design approaches and design testing approaches, utilized by a lot of the startups and a lot of the accelerators to really help them remove risk and learn a lot more about their customers. Another really fantastic way to get information is live trials and sampling. If you have an opportunity to do those in different markets, you learn a lot from doing that, and we'll talk about those all specifically. Another one is legal dry testing. Now, we'll share a little bit more about legal dry testing, because there's also illegal dry testing, and that is all about driving people through, most likely paid advertising or other means that you have, to a landing page and selling or getting signups or a wait list or pre-orders for something that you haven't produced yet. So really looking to see if something that you're thinking about resonates. Another one we like to do is really testing in smaller regional trade shows, so that you can get the feedback you need before you go into the larger trade shows, where you will then need to really be buttoned up and have a lot of those things worked out. There are other ways to get information, such as focus groups and surveys. But what we found, especially with new companies and smaller companies, you need a lot of volume, you need a lot of data, and those aren't usually as effective as some of these other methods. So now we all know that until you really get to where you're selling your product and asking for payment, you really don't get the perfect level of feedback. However, when you are asking for someone's time, such as in a one-to-one customer interview or an empathy interview, you have to truly promise them, in order to get them to really work with you, you need to be respectful and let them know that this is just about gathering data, and you in no way are going to try to sell them or pitch them your product. And we want you to stay true to that, because you're going to potentially harm that relationship if you don't do that. So just keep that in mind. Separate the research and the relationship building and the knowledge building from the selling. You can do that later. And then if they're excited about your product, they may ask you to sell to them versus you trying to sell to them when they're just trying to share information. So live trials and sampling. Now, international markets, and especially certain international markets, are really great for this. Depending on where you want to go, there are usually markets that are more likely to be great sampling markets. One example of this is in Singapore. Singapore is known as having large groups of people from India and China and Malaysia. All three of those groups are really important to understand because they're going to be completely different in those different markets. So if you want to understand the Indian market, that's a huge market. Same with China. Do some product testing in a smaller market, one that's business friendly, one that speaks English, one that is set up for a lot of companies to do trials and testing and sampling. So, and the same thing happens with countries in Europe. You can get really diverse groups of people in London and in Berlin and places in the Netherlands that you won't have to go into all sorts of different markets. You can get a pretty great sense of some of those markets by just going into some of what we call these test markets. When you do go into a test market, really be prepared in advance, understanding their culture, understanding how they operate, understanding their expectation. Be buttoned up, be professional, and follow best practices for testing, and making sure that you reduce bias and that you're not leading them, and that you really recognize some of the cultural mistakes in understanding and communication. And we'll talk a little bit more about those soon. Now, I'm not going to do a lot of pitching about Globig, but we do a lot of this work, and we help companies set up trials, whether it's healthcare and pharmaceutical and biotech companies and technology companies just around the world, and just help them get that actionable data so that they can focus on adjusting their products, and it gets them into those markets much, much quicker. The one-to-one prospect interview is always a really wonderful one. If you are able to reach out to LinkedIn to mirror companies that you have been really successful with in the market that you're in, finding companies, similar companies, and what you would consider perfect prospects in those new markets, and if you invite them to share some of their insights and ask them if they would give you some time, it's a really, really beneficial thing for you to do. You will learn much more about your product and your likelihood of success from some of your prospects, and just taking the time to talk to them. Again, keeping in mind that you don't sell them. It's so important. And also recognize cultural differences in communications and feedback. While someone might be willing to give you some time, they may, because of cultural differences, be somewhat hesitant to give you honest feedback. They might consider being nice more important than being honest. There are nuances around how you say things. So, for example, in the UK, it's not a well-known fact. It is certainly to someone from the UK, but when they say it's interesting, that actually means it's not very interesting, but they're very courteous and they're too kind to say that, that's not really that exciting to them. So understanding those cultural nuances around, is harmony more important? Is niceness more important? Is telling you what you want to hear more important culturally? Looking at how might you break through that? And some of the ways you can do that is you can bring in a neutral third party that just shares from the very beginning that I'm not, with the company, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm just here to ask, questions and be getting some data. So, you won't hurt my feelings. It's not something that you're going to have to worry about. That sometimes breaks that barrier internationally. And when you do these interviews, just try to reduce your bias. No leading questions. Again, if you need some help with getting support and neutral parties, we can, we're happy to help you do that. Now let's talk about legal dry testing. So legal dry testing is where a company creates a way to order something, to purchase something, when they haven't created it yet. They don't have it, it's not in existence. The most common way that companies do that is they offer something through an advertising or an online website where they do advertising to get people there and try to see if people respond to it and order it and want to put their name on something. It's illegal to take money from someone if you're not in the United States, and every country has different laws and sometimes they're even more robust. But if you can't deliver within 30 days, you can't take their money and you can't wait unless, and here's some caveats, you can share that the manufacturing of your product is contingent on enough orders. The manufacturing of your product may take longer, and that, if you don't produce this within the 30-day window, that the money will immediately be refunded. And we even recommend that you don't charge them until you are ready to ship. When you are doing legal dry testing, you'll want to test your messages and your offering. And what we recommend for that is using methodology called A/B split testing. And that's having multiple landing pages where you test one element at a time. Maybe it's the offer or the subject line or the pricing. And always just test one against the other, and that way you'll know what's performing better, and just keep getting better performing landing pages and offerings. Again, you're going to drive traffic from external sources such as online advertising or your social media. You can also drive from your internal resources, such as a pop-up on your website, or if you have an email list, you can test some ideas. And again, just be transparent and not deceptive. It's super important. And some of the things that you'll want to test are the ads that you're using, the messages, the offers, and then having them sign up maybe to a waiting list or an opportunity to pre-order, but don't charge them until you're ready to ship the product. Lots and lots of companies have even started their entire business this way. So the Banana Republic retail store was started by the owners or a couple that had, they found some really interesting shirts. They put an ad in a magazine and they sold them all out. And they thought, all right, now we're going to start producing more and more of these. And lots of companies have done a lot of different dry testing programs and found things that work. If you're just getting a dribble and it's not super exciting, test your messaging, test your advertising. But if there's really very little response, it gives you a sense before you invest too much that maybe you're not onto something. We're going to spend a little bit more time on talking about empathy interviews. So empathy interviews are a process from the world of design thinking, mostly in the product development area. And it's designed, it's the interviews of prospects and people that might be in the space, or people that are in a different country and just all over, that you want to get feedback from, and you want to do a lot of these. So unlike the one-to-one interviews with some prospects where maybe you have a handful, you want to get more data, just lots and lots of data. And there are these processes to do that. And they are where you just really talk to all sorts of different prospects and customers and related folks, people in those countries, just how they feel about the problem that you're trying to solve and how your approach is to fixing it, if it makes sense, and even your messaging. There's tons of pieces you can test in this. Before you start setting up these interviews, and again, we want to do like maybe 20 to 50 to 100 or 200 of these to get really good information. You want to make sure that you have locals involved. So whatever it is that you're doing, if you're testing an advertising campaign, if you're testing packaging, if you're testing how someone uses a product or what the product even is, make sure that the person doing the interviews speaks the language like a local, not just well. So American English versus British English, you're going to get all sorts of mixed signals. Make sure that they are truly local, accent-free if possible. So don't utilize someone in a foreign country that's really not easy to understand. It's just really important that you get these pieces right. If you can, and this is where it gets really difficult internationally, you want to do these in person. So if you can go into the market and spend a week or two in areas where your prospects are and the types of people you want to connect to, and you can get a lot of data and a lot of input, these interviews are much, much more effective. Second choice, which is optional, but recognize that you may get less data and maybe it's not quite as amazing, is to do web conferencing, just like what we do with Zoom for our webinars or a meeting internationally. You want to be able to read facial expressions and body language, and you want to see if someone's leaning in and if their pupils are dilating, if they're getting excited about something. You want to get as much of that feedback as possible. There is the option to record sessions, and some companies do that and they've done it effectively, but always recognize that when you add a recording, you're always going to get different data, and people are always going to put up a little bit more of a mask. They're going to be much more cautious in what they say. And even if you tell them that this is just for us to transcribe or just for our own information to get more good data, they are going to filter and be much more cautious and maybe not tell you everything that you could have learned from an interview where they're not, being recorded. So the other recommendation to make this work is you always work as a team. You need two people because one person should be taking notes and watching for all those reactions, and the other one is asking the questions. So what are some of those questions that you are going to be asked? Like, what can you learn? Well, the first thing before you get into these empathy interviews is you want to give people the permission to lie. And so let me tell you about that. Now, this is not lying about the information so much as the opportunity to tell stories about someone else that they may know that has this problem. Someone that's gone through this situation versus them. It's so much easier to tell you the truth about someone else than to tell it about yourself. It just takes this level of risk out. You'll still get fantastic information, and you'll get better information if you just give them the opportunity to share what they know about other people or something someone else has gone through. When you're doing these interviews, don't lead them to answers, because there are no right or wrong answers. Your objective is to learn. It's not to be proven correctly or proven wrong. It's just to learn. And the more that you can do that, the better information you're going to have, and the more you're going to be able to really help your company. When you're asking questions, don't ask yes or no questions. Don't make a person feel judged, where it's like, watch your expressions, watch how you respond. Try to be as neutral and as gentle and kind as possible. Don't make value statements such as, that's a great question. Instead, use just gratitude for everything, whether you appreciate what they're saying or whether it's kind of ruffling your feathers. Just thank you for sharing that. Ask why questions. Ask how would you. Use tell me more. Share a situation. Tell me a story or a situation that you were in or that someone was in. Give them the opportunity to share this information with you. What are some types of experiments you can do with the empathy interviews? There are lots of things you can test, and the more you test, the better you get at this. And here are just some of the common ones that we've done, things that we've wanted and needed to learn. Things such as we had new products or new features that we wanted to demonstrate and get feedback on. And it's amazing what you can learn when you watch people using something, things that work and things that don't work. We wanted to get a sense of priorities. We had lots and lots of different things that we wanted to allocate resources to, but we had to get more data on what was most important and then get just some help prioritizing that. We wanted to test whether a product made sense locally. Was it localized enough? Did the packaging make sense? Did the colors make sense? Did the way it fit and the way it was used makes sense. So in those markets that are so different, testing this in advance by having people use it or telling you about it or sharing their thoughts about something are really, really great sources of information. We've tested marketing, so marketing campaigns and packaging and online messaging and all sorts of, promotional things. Here's how we plan on sharing this. Does this resonate? How does this make you feel? How does this compare to what you've seen? Does this, make you happy? Is this something you're willing and interested in? We do user behavior testing where we just watch people, and whether it's online or whether it's manual, whether you have a product or a service. We also do competitive preference testing. If they don't know which company you're with, and you just give them a number of different companies or products and they can kind of share, you'll learn so much about what they prefer, what's familiar, what they like, what they don't like. You can test on whether, a market is ready for you or not, whether someone's interested, whether they'd be open to buying. You can check their purchase behavior based on how they would go through a payment plan, or, what are all those things you can test. And even pricing. What sort of pricing is where this product needs to be and how does it compete with others on the market? So the setup, here's just a helpful hint. Always, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is assume that people think you're going to sell them something. Remind them that this is not a sales call. You are just here to learn. Never talk about the company or try to sell them. If you cross that line, you will have lost all of the trust that you are trying to build up. All right, so let's talk about interview preparation. So before you start, here's some best practices. Introduce what you're doing and how the sessions will work. Prepare people in advance. What's going to happen and what they're going to do. Give them a sense of how the next 1 to 2 hours are going to be spent. Most people are willing to give you an hour, maybe 2 hours. That's pushing it. It's really hard to get any more time with them. So try to do most of your testing within that 1 hour framework. And always remind them it's not a sales call. We talked about that before. And give them a set amount of time to answer and do the things that you're trying to get the information you need. So if you have several projects, just say for the next 10 minutes, we're going to do this. For then, have some set of time it's really bound. And always be putting people at ease. Be kind and respectful and thankful and not judgmental, no matter how tough those conversations might get. Because some of them might be really hard. They might tell you how terrible they think your product is, or they see absolutely no reason to use it. And it's really important to just allow that to happen and do as many interviews as possible. The data you get from just 1 or 2 or 3 can be incredibly biased and not telling enough. Do a bunch of different interviews, because that's where you get the consistency. That's where you learn the most. And always recognize that you will have biases. Everyone has biases. And so one of the best ways to start eliminating some of that is to document what some of those are. Like, what are your hypotheses? What do you expect is going to happen? And what are the results of the research that you're going to have? You need to write those down. And here's why. There's such a thing called hindsight bias. We all have it. And it's been tested over and over and over again. And it's the sort of thing where we tell ourselves that we knew what was going to happen. And we all do this, and it makes surprises vanish, and it makes learnings vanish. So write down what we expect is going to happen in all the different pieces that you can, and what your bias is around it. You expect that this type of person is going to respond this way. And here's that information. And then you're going to compare that to what actually happened with all these places. The stuff in the middle is the learnings that you want to apply. And here's the rationale around that. The goal is to get about 50% of expected results. Because if you're not getting some unexpected results, then you probably are being really safe and really cautious and really maybe biased in how you're asking. You want to make sure that you are really learning and getting it. So increase your increase the questions around, maybe be a little more risk-taking. Make sure that you are getting about 50% of expected results versus 100. All right, so how do you get people to interview? Now, different businesses are different. There are all sorts of things that you can do if you have B2C, so consumers as people that you want to talk to, and B2B. We do a lot more work with B2B, so we're going to use that, but a lot of these do apply to consumer and other specialty groups as well. The most expensive way is to hire a local recruiting firm to help you identify and find people in the market that meet all of your criteria. It's something that you can do. I don't know that it's necessary. Most of the companies we work with do not go this path. They actually do the rest of the things that I'm going to recommend and do a lot of this themselves. You can post opportunities to participate in these sessions on trade show bulletin boards. If you can sponsor events and be a partner of an event group, you can potentially email their attendees and invite them after a show or before a show to participate. You know, partner with all sorts of different groups that have your prospects attending. Look at their social media sites, look at, you know, any sort of outreaches that they have, like do they have a message board that you can dialogue with people. You can post on those industry social sites, whether it's a Facebook business page or a LinkedIn business page or Zing or WeChat or Twitter. You can definitely look at ways to advertise to them based on all sorts of characteristics. You can target companies and individuals. You can do topical LinkedIn groups as well as Slack channels and meetups. There are lots and lots of meetups that you can post information and requests to network with some of the different individuals that are part of those meetups. You can also look to see if in your local market there are expats or individuals that meet those criteria in your local market that have recently come from the area you're at, because you can get some really good information from them as well. And if you have a target market that fits like university students, you can post those on message boards as well. So you can get lots of people. And then there's companies like Ask Your Target Market. And I believe that SurveyMonkey and other companies like that, they have groups of people that have signed up for some of these research projects. And so you can reach out to those as well. If you are going to be going into some of these markets, especially areas like Singapore, the people that you want to talk to will expect you to provide them with something to compensate them for their time. The more business related your business is, maybe the industry, you're not probably going to be able to give a senior executive that you're interviewing a small stipend. But what you can do is maybe there's research data that you can share, or a special book that you can provide, or a free consulting session, or some sort of a networking event ticket, or even just a fun event ticket, or, you know, like to some favorite musician, or coffee, or, you know, what are those things that you can do to just thank them for taking the time. For consumers and for other people, they do expect you to compensate you for their time. And the costs can vary from, you know, $100 an hour to a couple of $100s an hour. So if you need 20 or 50 people, just know what you may have to do is really thank them and pay them in certain situations. When you're doing these experiments, we talked a little bit about this before, but you know what you need to know what those big risks are for your business. Make sure that each one of those you take and build a plan around getting information. What are your hunches, your assumptions, your guesses? What are the big risks? And identify those and build a plan around how do you better understand this uncertainty. What are the things using these different research and knowledge building processes that we've shared, what is best for each one of those so that you can start reducing some of this risk. And of course, as we mentioned before, write it down, your hunches, your assumptions, your hypotheses, before you start your experiment, because if you don't, you will sabotage all of the hard work that you've done. And when you go into other countries, just recognize that the cultures, the behaviors, the desires, the communication approaches, they're all very, very different. And when you make assumptions from your perspective, from your country, you're always going to be wrong about the other country because you don't have that close understanding. So, and then especially if they speak a different language, use local natural language speakers that understand how to share this and really dig into that information just like you would need to, because it's always going to be different. And the biggest mistake we make is the thinking that countries where it's the same language as yours, maybe a different English speaking, whether it's like you're coming from the United States and you're working with Australia, or you're working with Canada, or you're working with UK, or Ireland, that is where we make the most mistakes, because we really think that they're similar to us when in fact their entire frame of reference and everything and how they think about things and how they use things and how they do things are going to be completely different. So just recognize that and try to remove that from the beginning. This workshop or this webinar is going to be posted on your dashboards, on the Globig dashboard, as well as the experiment worksheets to really guide you through setting these things up and some of the things that you want to know. We also have the empathy interview worksheet so that you can really dig into, what am I recording here? You want to record what they say. You want to record how they're responding. You want to record any sort of feelings that they might have, how they're thinking about things, what might be motivating them, what makes them tense and uncomfortable. When they're sharing something, what was the situation that they were in when they had this experience? You know, all of that is really relevant. And when you start having a lot more of these interviews, the data that you're getting is going to be really indicative and super, super helpful. You know, so we'll share all of these worksheets for you on the dashboard so that you too can use them to do all of these interviews in these different markets all around the world. I have some additional resources for you. Techstars has some really great videos around understanding your customer that include in empathy interviews. There's some really great Stanford information, and certainly the site Scaling Lean and some of the books that Ash Moira has written are all incredibly helpful, that they can guide you even more than we can. And if you need help, which you may, we would love to be a resource. So please, please, please reach out. I'm at anke@globig.co. I will happily make my team available. You know, just let's see how we can get you into those markets and reduce risk, reduce the time, increase the effectiveness, and the opportunity that you have to capture those markets. So thank you for participating. We welcome your feedback. Please let me know if these webinars are helpful and other topics that you'd really like us to share. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. And go global and go big.